Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the deep dive. As cat lovers, we often like to focus on the positive, right? But today, we're going to kind of dive into a darker side of the cat world. Something that we don't like to think about too much, but it's important, and that's hoarding and abuse.
It's definitely a tough subject,
Yeah.
but it is important to talk about it.
Yeah.
And, I think a good way to start this conversation is recognizing just how widespread this problem really is.
Yeah.
Some of the things that I was reading in preparation for this deep dive, hoarding situations, for instance, can involve dozens, even hundreds of cats.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
It's a staggering number.
It is.
Yeah. So I think, like I said, it's a tough subject to talk about, but it's important to understand. And then hopefully we can all kind of learn something from this and be more aware and help prevent these types of situations from happening. But I think before we get into the nitty-gritty, we need to kind of start at the beginning and define what exactly is cat hoarding.
Absolutely. I think it's easy to oversimplify and say, oh, you have a lot of cats, it must do hoarding.
Yeah.
But it's a lot more nuanced than that.
Okay.
And it's really about the inability to provide proper care for those cats.
Okay. So it's not just the number. It's the inability to provide proper care.
Exactly. Yeah. So, we're talking about things like food, water, sanitation, medical attention.
Mm-hmm.
If those basic needs are not being met,
Yeah.
then that's really where it crosses the line into a hoarding situation.
Right. So, even somebody who has like 10 cats, but if they're all well taken care of and healthy, then it wouldn't be considered hoarding, right?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely raises a red flag.
Yeah.
But you would hope that if an individual has that many animals that all of their needs are being met.
Right.
But if they aren't,
Right.
it's a serious problem.
Yeah. That makes sense. So, one of the things, that I found interesting in the source material that we were going through for this deep dive is that a lot of times these hoarders truly believe that they are helping these cats, even when it's obvious that, they're not.
Right.
So, is this like a mental health issue? What's going on there?
Yeah, a lot of times hoarding does go hand in hand with mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that everyone that has a hoarding situation has some sort of mental health issue.
Yeah.
But a lot of times they do.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be really complex.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. That can definitely be a factor. Some of this trauma.
Right.
People that have been through traumatic experiences may have this sort of, they have these attachment issues and
Right.
they almost have a distorted view of what care looks like.
Wow, it's a fascinating and disturbing aspect, of this whole thing.
It is.
The idea that somebody thinks they're helping when clearly, it's detrimental. The podcast really painted a grim picture of the conditions in some of these hoarding situations.
Absolutely. And it is grim,
Yeah.
the overcrowding, the filth.
Right.
And the thing is, it impacts not only the physical health
Right.
of the cats
Of
involved,
course.
but also their mental health as well.
Yeah. Now, speaking of trying to recognize hoarding situations, there were some pretty obvious signs that were mentioned.
Yeah.
A strong odor,
Oh, yeah.
visible health issues,
Right.
the owner's reluctance to let anybody inside their house.
Right.
What about, are there less obvious signs that we should be looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, maybe pay attention to how many new cats you see coming into a household.
Okay.
If there's a constant influx of new cats,
Mm-hmm.
that's definitely a red flag. And maybe just pay attention to the owner's behavior. If you hear them talking about, oh, I rescued all these cats, but it seems like they don't really have the means to care for them.
Right.
That would be something to kind of keep an eye on.
Gotcha. So, it sounds like if we see something, we should say something.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But, it's a sensitive subject, and I'm sure a lot of people would hesitate to report something for fear that maybe they're wrong or they're misinterpreting the situation.
Sure.
What would you say to somebody who's kind of like on the fence about whether they should say something or not?
I would say you don't have to be an expert
Okay.
to report your concerns. If something seems off, it's always best to err on the side of caution.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've been talking about hoarding, and I know it can get kind of confusing because the podcast also talked about abuse, and I think it's important to distinguish between the two, right?
Well, absolutely.
So, what is the difference?
Well, hoarding, like we discussed, is often coming from this sort of warped sense of care, whereas abuse is a deliberate act of inflicting harm. So it might manifest as physical violence or neglect
Okay.
or abandonment or even exploitation.
Okay, so it's intentional. It's like they're intentionally
Right.
trying to cause suffering.
Right.
Okay, and that's different than
Very much so.
the hoarding situation.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the podcast also mentioned, briefly touched upon the psychological impact that this abuse can have on cats. I mean, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Like, how does it actually manifest?
Well, just imagine
Yeah.
living in a constant state of fear, right?
Right.
So, you're going to see things like cowering, excessive hiding, maybe even aggression. So these cats, they're just on edge all the time.
Wow. Yeah.
And unfortunately, that stress and that fear can actually lead to physical ailments as well.
And that's not to mention, this disturbing link that the podcast pointed out between animal abuse
Right.
and domestic violence.
Absolutely.
I mean, I find that very, very disturbing.
It is disturbing.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the studies do show
Right.
that there is a correlation there.
Wow.
And so I think it's really important that we not only address the animal cruelty for the sake of the animal,
Right.
but we also need to consider the potential safety
Yeah.
of the humans involved as well.
So essentially, by recognizing animal abuse, we could actually be protecting people.
Potentially.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Heavy stuff.
It is. It's heavy stuff. So where do we go from here? I mean, it
Yeah.
feels like such a big, overwhelming issue. I mean, what can we do?
Well, the good news is
Yeah.
we're not powerless, right?
Right.
There are things we can do, and one of the most important things is to be vigilant.
Vigilant. Okay.
Yeah, like, be aware of what's happening in your community.
And if you see something, say something.
But what if I'm wrong? What if I think something's going on, but
Yeah.
it's not really? I don't want to falsely accuse anybody or
I
get
understand.
involved in something that's not my business.
I understand that. And it's a delicate situation for sure.
Yeah.
But, again, like we were saying before, you don't have to be an expert.
Right.
And honestly, it's better to err on the side of caution.
Okay.
If you see something that just doesn't seem right, report it.
Okay. So reporting suspected abuse is a big one, but what about, are there other ways that we can help?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's, organizations that are out there that are dedicated to rescuing and rehabilitating abused cats.
Right.
And they need our support. So, if you want to volunteer your time or donate money or even just foster a cat, all of those things
Yeah.
can make a huge difference.
So basically, if you can't adopt, foster. Okay, great. Now, another thing that the podcast talked about was spaying and neutering.
Right. Absolutely critical.
Yeah. I mean, I would think that would be a big part of,
Yeah.
preventing overpopulation.
It is. Absolutely.
But is that enough? Are there other things that need to be addressed?
It's a good question. And the answer is, unfortunately, no.
Okay.
Spaying and neutering is great, but it's not a magic bullet.
Right.
There's other issues like irresponsible breeding practices, lack of affordable vet care.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of systemic issues that need to be addressed as well.
Now, something else that we've kind of touched on before, but I think we need to delve into it a little bit deeper, is this link between animal abuse
Right.
and domestic violence.
Yeah. It's a tough one,
It is.
but it's an important one to talk about.
Yeah.
And the sad reality is people that abuse animals
Right.
are more likely to be violent towards humans as well.
I see. And so, I mean, what can we do with this information?
Well, I think the main takeaway here
Yeah.
is that if you see signs of animal abuse, it's important to consider
Yeah.
that there might be something more going on in that household and to maybe reach out for help,
Yeah.
whether it's for the animals
Right.
or for the people involved or both.
Right.
It's important to be aware of that connection.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to think about. And I mean, it highlights how important education is.
Right.
I mean, if we can educate people about, the responsibilities of pet ownership,
Absolutely.
maybe we can prevent some of these things from happening in the first place.
I think that's a great point. I think a lot of people, they don't fully understand what it means to own a pet.
Yeah,
It's a big responsibility.
it is.
It's not just about, the cute, cuddly stuff.
Right.
It's about being able to provide for their needs, food, water, shelter, vet care, of course.
Right. And not to mention the emotional needs.
Yes, of the
Yeah.
animal.
Yeah, they need love.
Yeah. Attention, playtime, all of that.
Right. Okay, so the podcast also talked about how important it is to address, the mental health issues that can contribute to hoarding.
Right.
How can we encourage people who might be struggling to seek help?
Well, I think the most important thing is to approach them with compassion.
Okay.
Don't be judgmental.
Right.
Just express your concerns and let them know that there are resources available to help.
Okay, so basically just be supportive and let them know they're not alone.
Exactly. That's the key.
The podcast also talked about, creating a culture of compassion.
Yes.
I like that phrase.
That's a good one.
What did that mean to you?
It means recognizing that animals are sentient beings.
Okay.
They feel pain, they feel fear, they feel joy just like we do. And they deserve our respect and our protection.
So it's about challenging that view.
Yes.
That somehow animals are less than.
Absolutely. We've got to move past that.
Okay, so how can we do that? I mean, how can we actually cultivate this culture of compassion?
Well, I think it starts with our everyday choices.
Like what?
Well, for example, choosing to adopt rather than shop. That's a big one.
Okay. So, basically supporting organizations that rescue animals.
Exactly.
Rather than
buying from breeders. Yeah.
Breeders. Okay, that makes sense. And supporting legislation that protects animals from cruelty. You can, contact your elected officials. Let them know that this is an issue that's important to you. Sign petitions, attend rallies, things like that.
So basically just using our voices and our actions to speak up for the animals.
Exactly.
All right.
And also education is huge.
Yeah.
Talking to your kids about animal welfare, teaching them to treat animals with kindness and respect.
Yeah, so starting from a young age.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The more we can instill these values in future generations,
the better off we'll be.
It's inspiring to think about, what if we could actually get to a point where compassion for animals is just like a given? It's just built into our culture.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be...
Wouldn't that be amazing?
It would. It would be fantastic.
But, we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff today, and I don't want our listeners to walk away feeling overwhelmed or what can I do,
Right.
So what are some, tangible actions that we can all take to make a difference, even if it's just a small difference?
Well, I think it's important to remember that even small actions can have a ripple effect.
Okay.
So, for example, choosing cruelty-free products. That sends a message to companies that animal welfare is important to consumers.
Okay, so being mindful of the products that we buy?
Absolutely, yeah.
What about, social media?
Oh, social media is huge.
Yeah.
Sharing information about animal welfare, supporting organizations that are out there doing good work, even just starting conversations about these issues. I mean, all of that can make a difference.
So using our platform, however big or small it may be, to kind of spread the word.
Absolutely.
Now, I know a lot of our listeners are already really passionate about cats. And they're probably listening to this okay, but what else can I do? How can I really step up my advocacy?
Yeah. And for those people, I would say, volunteering at a local shelter or a rescue organization is a great way to make a hands-on impact.
Okay. So, donating your time.
Yes.
And what about, fostering?
Oh, fostering is amazing.
Yeah.
It gives cats a loving temporary home.
Right.
And it frees up space in the shelters.
Right. So more cats can be helped.
Exactly.
Okay, that's great.
And of course, donating to reputable animal welfare organizations.
Right. So if you can't donate your time, donate your money. Okay. I think those are all really great suggestions. And, as we wrap up this deep dive, we've talked about some really tough stuff.
Yeah.
But I want to leave our listeners with a sense of hope.
Yeah.
Knowing that there are so many people out there that are working hard to make things better for cats.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's easy to get discouraged.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that every little bit helps.
Right.
Every voice raised against cruelty, every dollar donated, every hour volunteered.
Yeah.
It all adds up.
So to all of our fellow cat lovers out there, remember that we have a voice and we can use it to make a difference. And by working together, we can create a future where every cat can thrive.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, and it's definitely been challenging.
It has.
But I think it's also been really empowering.
I agree.
So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time for another Deep Dive.